A prescription of hope for the world's deadliest disease, next on Listen Up. Welcome to Listen Up. I'm Lorna Duick. The growth of AIDS and the need for healing is the world's largest crisis. But there could be a breakthrough into this need. For the first time, the world's Christian community has gathered to mobilize compassion, action, and hope for AIDS. Like the need, the reality of the story is not easy to watch, and the documentary we're about to bring you has content and images that may not be suitable for young children. Listen Up's Denise Lottie covered Prescription of Hope to discover the right response for the AIDS crisis.
The statistics are overwhelming, the prognosis even worse. AIDS is the most destructive disease mankind has ever known, and it's going to get worse. But even in the face of destruction, there are stories of hope. Nearly 1,000 Christians from over 80 countries came to Washington looking for a prescription.
Well, the first moment you hear you're HIV positive, all your dreams and all your ideals are shattered. At that stage, they couldn't say how long you will be alive. The doctor said probably 3 or 4 years. So I was wondering, should I continue studying? Is it worthwhile? Would anybody use an HIV positive minister? Won't they just reject you?
Whether in the pulpit or the pews, HIV affects all of Africa's churches, but most suffer in silence.
And only when I started having my first opportunistic infections in 1991, 92, we decided, okay, perhaps this is the time to go public and use the opportunity as a witness opportunity. But we were really scared. I was in a congregation, ministering in a congregation situation, and I was worried that the congregation members are going to reject me, be afraid of me, stigmatize me, push me out of it. But it was really amazing. I really experienced that the Christians in my congregation were there for me. I very often asked myself if it would have been any different if I contracted HIV in a sexual relationship, if they would have been so supportive.
Predominantly transmitted through sex in Africa, AIDS is shrouded in many layers of shame.
I said, why not test me? I mean, I don't have a problem. I'm white, or all my girlfriends that I choose is there's nothing wrong with them. And I tested HIV positive. And then the first thing that went through my mind is, who would I tell? What will people think of me?
He was married to Antoinette for 2 weeks before he told her his secret.
When they diagnosed me HIV positive, I was crying my eyes out. The counselor was patting me on the back and saying, it will be fine. But what they don't realize is you don't think it's going to be fine when you sit there. And I walked out feeling strange. I mean, I'm a young person. I was 19 at the time. You never think about a terminal illness that you will have for life that will probably kill you. And it's definitely changed me. But as you said, I mean, I actually have forgiven him for that. Because I just placed myself in his shoes and I asked myself, what would I have done if I was in that same position? To have met somebody that I love and to tell that person something so almost terrible, and it would be very difficult. So I understand that, and because of that I forgive him for that.
Through forgiveness, the Fouchés found their calling.
We wanted people around us to know our status so we don't have to hide anything, so that we can be free people. And we started in small groups, just telling our families, friends around us, and we saw we expected rejection, and in return we actually got acceptance. People understand it. In some way we can all relate because we are humans. And we said, well, this is not too bad, we can do this. And one person heard of us, and then a church invited us, and then some other people invited us, and it just grew and grew and grew into a ministry.
AIDS affects all classes, all colors, and all age groups, especially children.
The children, the ages of them, they've gone much younger. They're between 4 and 8 now because of the myth that if you rape a virgin, you would pass the virus from your body to the child's. So the rape stats have shot up, and it's just younger and younger children that are being abused.
Most perpetrators are family members, and courts are slow in bringing justice, if at all. Still, she deals with up to 20 cases a week.
I sit and play with him in my office, and I use this bear. It's called Bobby the burden-bearing bear. So with Bobby Bear, they can show us what has happened with them or whether it was anal penetration. And also the child will then use it, some kids use it as a protector for them and a comforter while they take it through the court proceedings and to hospital and everything. So it's sitting and playing with them until they open up and tell you what has happened. This rape kit is when I take a child to hospital. Sometimes you have to wait 5 hours before you see a district surgeon. So you keep the child occupied with a book and crayons, and sometimes they draw the perpetrator or things that he might have done to them. Pads, if there's been anal or vaginal tears, tissues, little panty, because the panty has to be taken for our police reports, or a little underpants when it's a little boy. And then we also give them a little sweet and a cold drink to keep them comfortable at hospital until they get treated. And then also wet wipes to clean them, because there's no place to clean themselves after a medical examination. And then a brown bag to put our exhibits in there so we don't destroy any evidence that might be under the clothes.
Child rape is evidence of a great evil. Clifton Park says witch doctors are to blame for encouraging the rape of innocents. A police department prayer team goes into prayer each time they bring in a child.
I'd like to see the churches more involved, playing with these kids, looking after them, praying for them, and just realizing that they should look after their own in their own community and not say it's not their problem, because it is their problem, it's their community.
Prayer is one of the greatest prescriptions for hope. Uganda's First Lady, Janet Museveni, was confronted with the horrible face of AIDS. She said it brought her nation to its knees.
Well, you see, Uganda had had a turbulent past. We had been through a war. Many families had separated. Many people had died. The country had been shattered, literally. And people prayed. They poured into churches and prayed throughout the nights, and they called on God, and God answered their prayers, and the political situation changed in Uganda, and people became more hopeful, and there was happiness and hope. And all of a sudden, AIDS came in. And they just had to go back to prayer. They started praying again. They started crying again and wondering, why now? Why AIDS? But that hope, the hope that had changed our political turbulence, we had that hope and believed that God would hear. But we didn't know what to do with AIDS. We didn't know a disease that had no cure. We didn't know what to do.
Her newly elected husband, Yoweri Museveni, acted fast and soon headed up what would become Africa's most successful AIDS campaign. The strategy emphasized biblical values, sexual purity, and openness in talking about AIDS. A decade later, the HIV infection rate fell from 18.5% to 6.1%.
Where initially many countries didn't want to talk about AIDS in their own countries because they thought that it would discourage tourism and things like that. But my husband said that what was important is to save the people rather than saving the economy, because there is no economy if there is no people. But eventually, people saw that talking about this was really very crucial. And now we get many delegations coming from other African countries to come to Uganda to learn from our experiences.
Efforts are ongoing to stem the destruction of AIDS.
We are a praying nation, that we pray like we are a blind nation, and we just wait on God to lead us through this darkness. But we also work like we have no God, and those two I believe, have made this difference.
When we return, find out how one Canadian family is touching the lives of hundreds of AIDS orphans in Thailand.
I'd say somebody who has a life-changing diagnosis like HIV, whether they take drugs and live long or not, it's changed their life forever. They're going to live with it. I'd say that for the Christian wanting to know what to do, I'd say just reach out to that person. Listen to them and pray with them. You say, that must be tough. Can I pray with you? Oh, who, in whose name? You say, well, the Lord loves you. Jesus came for the hurting, and it must be hard to deal with that. And I would love to just pray for you and support you in life. Jesus put his words into action with a simple touch, and that communicates the love of the Lord.
8-year-old Nikki Rideout loves to shower her parents' faces with kisses. Like most girls, she craves their attention and love. But she is not like most girls. Nikki has full-blown AIDS. Roy and Avis Rideout of Newfoundland have devoted much of their lives as missionaries to Thailand. Little did they know when they met Nikki 7 years ago that their biggest mission was to come.
It was on a Monday morning when I walked into this room that they had set up for kids with AIDS. I knew nothing about AIDS. When I looked on the floor, on a bamboo mat, there must have been 5 or 6 kids there. There wasn't even a year old, 2 years old, 3, 4-year-old kids. And they were crippled. They couldn't walk, they couldn't sit, and they couldn't crawl. And they had little spindly little legs, bloated stomachs, diarrhea, ear infections. It was a sight that I didn't like to see. But I worked in a refugee camp for a year, and I saw a lot of people dying from starvation. I saw the graves, mass graves dug, and hundreds of kids bullnosing graves. So I saw that before. But this was something different, and I walked in and I sat on the floor, and I knew somebody had to do something.
The first thing Avis did was to touch the babies.
I reached out my hand, and I saw the nannies that was sitting around, and they had rubber gloves on, and they had sheets prepared on the floor because the diarrhea was so severe. The sores were oozing, and I mean the smell from their breath, the infection was high. I have never experienced it in the refugee camp, even though I saw a lot of people dying there. But I touched a little boy that was about 4 years old, and I'm sure it was the first time that flesh had touched flesh with him. And his eyes was just lit up like 2 light bulbs, and I knew it had to be the touch that was going to bring hope and bring transformation into those lives.
Nikki was the first one to reach out to Avis.
I remember Nikki at 2 years old crawling over to me and sitting on my lap. She had no hair. Her ears were infected. Her smell was so bad that you would have to turn your head. But there was something that inside of me, it was love. It was compassion. And I held her close to my body. I could feel my heart was beating faster because I knew that God was speaking to my heart. I was going to have to do something. I went home and I told my family there was a little girl in the orphanage, and her name was Jerawi in Thai. And I said, I want to bring her home. And my oldest daughter, Natasha, said, Mommy, she's HIV. She's got full-blown AIDS. No one will come and visit us at our home. None of my friends at school will come if we bring an AIDS baby in our home. But I knew I was going to do it, and I had to do it. I had a compelling spirit. It's like being called to be a missionary. When the call is there, then you move.
The first hurdle was fear.
But God removed the fear at that time when the first night I brought her home. She slept on the floor by my bed, and it's very much alive in my mind. And I woke up in the morning, she had bumped her nose, I guess, against the bed or something, and was blood. I mean, blood everywhere. I jumped out of bed, and all of a sudden, this heavy, dark cloud came into my heart, and I was afraid. So I grabbed the sheet that she was on, and I took the two ends of the sheet, and I walked out to the steps, and you know, I stopped suddenly, and I said, God, I said, I can't do this. I was afraid, and I saw myself in the same shoes as back in the government orphanage. I said, I will not do it. You remove the fare, or Nikki goes back to the government orphanage, and that's when it all happened. All of a sudden, peace came in my heart. I put her on the floor, and the sheet was full of blood, and I held her close to my heart. I see myself walking down the stairs and putting her in the bathroom with no rubber gloves and starting to wash the blood off of her with my own hands.
6 years later, Ava still doesn't wear gloves. Love and tenderness transformed Nikki.
We didn't really have a prognosis from the Thai doctors. It was obvious enough. They didn't expect her to live. And that was the prevailing attitude among doctors and nurses in the hospitals. And that's why they didn't get the care that they needed.
The Rideouts created Agape Home, an orphanage for HIV-infected babies like Nikki.
The AIDS patients were sort of rejected, left aside, and well, if we have time for them, then we'll try and do something, but it's like no point, they're going to die anyway. That was the attitude. But as a result of our ministry, what we've been doing, that's all changed.
All the 129 children who have passed through their doors have received tender, loving care. 40 of the children have gone on to be adopted. For others, Agape is the first and last home they'll ever have.
Our first year, we had so many die. It was, I felt like I wasn't sleeping. We were constantly having funerals, rushing to the hospital. My first year was like a nightmare. Over these 5 years, God has given me something, stability in the midst of grief and sorrow. For the little ones, I feel like I've kind of released that. We weep, we cry, we mourn, we hear their voices, for months and months after, we see them, we hear them laugh. But I'm reminded of one thing, and that is we're made for the glory of God. He didn't make us to live here for a long time, and at the Agape, it's a preparation for a better place. And if I can prepare the kids for a better place, then I've got to be willing to release them and let them go. When we talk about death, it's an open thing at Agape. We allow our kids to be in the funerals. They know that they're going to die someday. They know that Jesus loves them. There's a place prepared for them, and we don't close doors on death at Agape, because death is as real as birth or as living. And we've had 40 go, and my heart is always heavy, always broken. I find myself days crying after funerals. I feel I carry a heavy load.
It's a labor of unconditional love.
It's certainly changed our ministry. I think it's changed it for the better, in that I feel that all that we did in Thailand previous to starting Agape Home was just preparation for this. I believe the reason God brought us here to Thailand was to start Agape Home. And I don't apologize for saying that.
I believe God has allowed Nikki Ryder to come into our home and into our lives to be able to transmit the gospel of Jesus Christ in Thailand.
Although Nikki still has AIDS, she likes to talk about the future. What sort of man she'll marry, what career she'll have. It's the miracle of Agape love.
Those children have had a better life than they could have had anywhere else. That is our belief. We believe that with all our hearts, that Agape Home in Thailand is the best place next to a family where any of these children could possibly be. They get good care, they get good nutrition, and they get lots of love and affection. I tell everybody I talk to everywhere, Agape is the best medicine. The love of God, the love that they receive. There is no medicine as powerful as that of love.
If you would like to help the Rideouts in their ministry to abandoned children with AIDS, or if you would like more information about the Agape Home, please write to their Canadian branch at the Agape Home Network Canada, P.O. Box 1455, Bay Roberts, Newfoundland, AOA 1GO. Or email Roy and Avis at agape@loxinfo.co.th.
And we're going to conclude our program covering the Prescription of Hope conference and the wonderful response that the Christian community is pulling together for the AIDS crisis in the world. I want to introduce to you our ListenUp producers. With me right now are Denise Lottie, who was the reporter you saw on camera, and Cheryl Weber, the producer on site at Washington that pulled all the details together. And you guys came back changed from covering the AIDS conference. Cheryl, you've done over 100 stories for ListenUp. Why was this one different?
Well, I just see that AIDS is something that the church has ignored, and it's the place that we need to be. It's the most hurting, and it's almost overwhelming for Denise and I that week to try to take in just the scope of this tragedy, from the orphans to the AIDS babies to young people dying under 30 to grandparents taking care of 15 kids. There's so many aspects. It just overwhelmed us in so many ways.
Were you hopeful? I'm just thinking the conference whole theme was hope. Did it happen?
I think it did. Seeing Christians come together and care about it and begin to network, that was the thing I really saw, is people networking and little signs on the board saying, everyone from Kenya, meet here in room so-and-so. And so Christians are coming together, and it's just been our prayer all week that this programming will cause people in Canada to really start to get involved and to care.
Denise, you came home surprised how many agencies there were out there that want to care.
Yes, I mean, there's certainly a lot of ministries, small ministries, doing things, but they just don't have the exposure, or people don't know about them. And we really need to get behind them. They are all over the world. I met people from Uzbekistan. I met people from the Solomon Islands.
And I'm delighted that you met the Rideouts from Newfoundland, because that's the first really strong Canadian mission that was sent out by the Pentecostal Assemblies to do that. Anyway, you can tap into our website and you can get more about that. You challenged me to pray. You said you think that's the answer.
Well, that's what everyone was telling us. So, and that was the overriding sense that we got attending the conference. And I mean, there are so many forces meeting.
The power.
Yeah.
The power of prayer. You can find out more about this by tapping into our website. Thanks for joining us.
If you have any questions, comments, or story ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us at ListenUp, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4N2, or email us at listenup@crossroads.ca.